Okay, next is Carla Shumann. Hi, Carla. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Hi. Oh, okay. All right, thank you. So I can't see, and anyways, I wanted to start off by saying thank you so much for listening when I spoke the last time I was here. So I want to start off by saying thank you, Superintendent Cheryl, for connecting me with the other superintendents and other staff here in the district. So I would like to start off by saying that I spoke with Amanda Sherry, the MTSS coordinator, regarding mental health and what we can do to support students and the whole identification and things like that. So I'm happy to hear that there's a lot of things coming, and I believe that was mentioned. So it's good to hear that it's going to be in place. But a couple of things that I addressed with her was, how do we keep you? How do we keep the staff? Because as budget and as funds, we know that things dry up. So I wanted to ask, how do we plan to continue that model after the 2 years or the 3 years that the money is being offered for these services? And another thing too is, how can we provide training to parents in identifying these issues? Because I'm a true believer that not everything relies on the schools. We can't put all the pressure and all the identification on the teachers, but we also have to give parents an idea and support and education and how to identify those issues. So she said she was going to talk to her superintendent and kind of go from there. So I'm looking at my time. So the other thing I wanted to talk is, I did speak to Superintendent Jeff Jaster regarding regarding safety. And I was really happy to hear that there's a lot of things in place. I did have some comments, and he's going to look into certain things just to make sure that those tasks that they had are in place. And I know some of the information is kept confidential for obvious reasons. So that's one thing. And the other thing I wanted to address, because one of the concerns that I have, as you know, is nurses, having nurses in schools. So I did a little bit of research, and I did talk to Superintendent Jaster, and I told him I was going to provide him some of the information I was able to find. But based on CDC and the American Federation of Teachers and the National Education Association, they have found that nurses in schools help reduce absenteeism. They also help identify mental health issues and other medical issues in our students. And when there's a nurse in the school present, teachers tend to spend an average of 6.2 minutes per day dealing with injured or ill students. Without a nurse, that raises up to 26.2 minutes per day. So 22.6 minutes per day that each teacher spends dealing with sick children. So I think it is cost effective to have, or at least to start the conversation about having nurses, not necessarily nurses, but having a system way where nurses assistants, someone that is there to provide that support to our students. So I'm here to ask the board to consider that for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Joe Bonney. Good evening, sir. Thank you for joining us.
I've been here many times about your new bylaw packages. Congratulations, it's now in effect. I did not disagree with anything Brad Blasey said about the value of the changes at the June 20th meeting, though it looked like he and Phil Roush had staged the defense beforehand. I did not see the long takedown of my early comments made at the end of the June 6th meeting until after the June 20th meeting. Seems you broke the agenda, and the superintendent was supposed to give comments before the closed session, so I left. Items 8 and 9 got switched, and so I wasn't there. Regarding the comments on my concerns, I never mentioned that John Lauterbach said Thrun was good for the board's defense. That was a quote from Mr. Sherrill. I did say that the two lawyers on the board both thought it was a good idea, which was another Sherrill quote. Even with the extended comments at that meeting, no mention was made that the bylaws were on the website for comparison, a specific request made on multiple occasions. In fact, the link had only been sent to the board on June 8th. However, at the June 20th meeting, Mr. Sherrill said the bylaws had been on the website for a month, so the public had 30 days and the board had 12 days. Anyway, good to know it was there after the fact. I have looked at the selection of bylaws, yes, It's simpler, easier to maintain, and harder to prove malfeasance. Now, water under the bridge for another illustration of lack of transparency. Next topic, Freedom of Information requests. Up until June 20th, 2021 meeting, you acknowledged what letters contained FOIA requests on the minutes. Now they are just documented as generic letters. While the administration has been a little adversarial on FOIA requests, more on that later, we have been able to get the board packages for a few meetings. These are large packages. You folks get 4 days, if you include Saturday and Sunday, to go over 150 to 200 pages. You have my sympathy. I've not been through everything yet, but I had a big surprise. In the package you all were given for the June 20th meeting, there was a 28-page policy section on how you were going to handle the next health crisis during the 2022-2023 school year. Full description of how you were going to do virtual learning for the kids again, lots of details on the middle of the process and the end of the process for grades, but we are now aware of the exaggerations that the government is capable of, and we hope the threshold for abusing the kids will be a little higher this time on the front end of that process for engaging that process. We've heard a lot about mental health concerns for minor populations. Can we have the same concern for the majority? And the fact that this information was in the package, distributed to the board, but had zero mention during the meeting is not aligned with the Open Meeting Act and doing the board's business in front of the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Renitabanidiz. Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. I wanted to help educate the public a little bit on the process of the Freedom of Information Act. I did put in a request, and that was made on May 27th, and it involved the agenda packets for the MPS board meetings. That information was met with a 10-day extension request from Mr. Bruton, the FOIA coordinator. So I did eventually get the response in a timely manner after that, basically stating that they granted the request, which we are allowed according to FOIA to get a 6-month subscription, which is what I requested, as well as the 3 prior months. It was stated in there that the district has not determined that a waiver or reduction of fees assessed for processing your FOIA request is in the public interest. So therefore, there was a fee of $344.97 requested for the 9 agenda packets. In response to that, I asked Mr. Bruton if he could explain why this did not fall under the conditions within the FOIA law for the fee document, which says a search for a public record may be conducted or copies of public records may be furnished without charge or at a reduced charge if the public body determines that a waiver or reduction of the fee is in the best interest, because searching for or furnishing copies of the public record can be considered as primarily benefiting the general public. My further comment, it would seem that disclosing this information is indeed to benefit the general public. It is a public meeting after all. We are forbidden to attend any of the study committee meetings where this information is discussed. Then we sit in meetings to hear motions for details that we are not allowed to see. Your feedback is appreciated. So then I received a response saying that the Board of Education meeting agenda information is currently made available to the public in multiple modes, noting the board agenda, which is made available, topics are discussed and acted upon in a public forum at the monthly meetings. Meeting minutes of education subcommittee meetings are read aloud at each meeting. Meetings are broadcast live. Meetings are recorded, made available to the public. Minutes from each Board of Education meeting are made available to the public. So it is the opinion of the district that the disclosure of the information in the current formats affords public access. So therefore, I send a check, which we have to pay a check for half of the fee to begin with, so $172.48 to receive this data. My concern with all of that, yes, we've gotten the agenda packets, which I appreciate, because according to the Freedom of Information Act, we have access to those as the public. As was noted, there's no longer a notation when you receive letters from the community of whether there's a FOIA request or not.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, Ms. Lisa Hansen. Good evening, thank you for joining us.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Hansen. I began attending and speaking school board meetings last year, April 2021. It's been a very interesting journey. I don't think any of us could have imagined all that's happened since then. And I chose to simply observe over the last few months because I want to publicly say that I think that you're all good people. And nothing that I say is any kind of a personal attack. I think there are a lot of good people throughout our community and country that have been deceived and manipulated by the powers that be to buy into the agenda that's being pushed through our schools. It's incredibly unfair for this to come down to parents and grandparents and school boards across our great nation. Our leaders have failed us. They've forgotten that their responsibility is to represent we the people. They've aligned with identity politics rather than standing up for American values. This is bigger than a political party. It comes down to our God-given rights and liberty. Our schools are responsible for keeping our kids safe and academically educating them. Everything else is overreach. I believe that everyone should be treated with kindness, respect, and dignity because all lives matter. I've observed that those preaching tolerance are typically the least tolerant. I've watched adults call people names and even declare that if people don't agree with them, they can't be friends. It's irrational and immature behavior. Difference of opinion and robust debate are part of our American experience and tradition. We're a melting pot. Diversity runs much deeper than skin color and gender identity. There's nothing inclusive about trying to shame people into silence and bullying them into compliance. Kids are forced to go along with the agenda or they're reprimanded. That violates their First Amendment right to their free speech, and that is unacceptable. So, like our kids, I have the right to simply say no, thank you, enough is enough. I've personally witnessed horrific bullying by a transgender child to a non-transgender child this past school year, so it's an illusion to believe that bullying is one-sided. Bullying is never appropriate, yet that's exactly what's happening to parents and grandparents and kids that disagree. Just because the media and big tech and universities and corporations are going along with this doesn't make it right. This agenda has been decades in the making. We're not experiencing an organic movement. I'm not sure what the most recent results are for where the United States ranks internationally K through 12 in reading, math, and science, but until we're number one, our kids deserve for the focus to be on their academic education. Identity politics has no place in our schools. It's creating division, and that is not unity. Denying our kids their First Amendment right to free speech does not create an inclusive culture, and it undermines our American values. So I am here to say enough is enough. Thank you. God bless America.
Thank you.